Are we all set to go?
Okay.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this, our final breakfast of the 20 to 21 season for the Larchmont Local Summit. My name is Nina Rescio. I am the Vice President of the Local Summit, and I am here standing in for Elaine Chapnick, our President, who is unable to attend today. This is our last public meeting. Our breakfasts will resume next September. We do not know yet the format because it will turn on the circumstances on the ground, whether it will be by Zoom or in person at the Nautilus. Time will tell. But thank you, all of you. Thank you, LMC Media, first of all, for getting us through this year, for being so supportive and teaching us so much about how to use Zoom. Thank you to our guests today, and we'll introduce them to you in just a moment, but their presence here is perfectly timed, and we look forward to a really wonderful presentation. And thank you to everyone who has continued to attend our summit breakfasts. We appreciate your support, and we hope that you find that what we're presenting to you is useful and helpful. Today, we are using a webinar format, which means you will not see anyone except the panelists and my co-host, which is Doris Block, who worked on the committee and pulled most of this together for us. Our two speakers are Michael Delohery, who is the Bureau Chief of the Cybercrimes Unit of the Westchester County District Attorney's Office, and Ken Citarella, who is the Principal Privacy Officer for Guidepost International. Both are experts in the field of cybersecurity, and they're going to tell us what the threats are that are looming and how we can best protect ourselves in the future, actually in the present. And certainly, given what we're reading in the paper, it's a very timely conversation. At the end of following the presentation by our speakers, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. You can submit a question by using the chat function at the bottom of your screen, or you can go to the participants icon, click on it, and raise your hand, and then you'll be called on, and our friends at LMC Media will unmute you so that you can ask your question once you've been recognized after your hand is raised. If you're on a mobile device, I believe that, let me see, the option is in the More tab. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure that LMC Media will correct me at the appropriate moment. Before we proceed any further, I do again want to thank our LMC partners, everyone who has come to continue to support our programs, and our speakers. We're very, very grateful for them, and we hope that you find this to be a very interesting and helpful presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Doris, who will tell you about our two speakers and start our program. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. We are fortunate today to have with us two such leading experts in the cybercrime and security fields. First, Kenneth Citarella. Ken is Senior Managing Director for the Investigations and Cyber Forensic Practice of Guidepost Solutions, LLC, and is the Chief Privacy Officer of Guidepost Solutions. Guidepost Solutions is a leader in domestic and international investigations and security and technology consulting. Before joining Guidepost, Ken worked at a commercial law firm and was in the corporate investigation division of Prudential. And prior to that, Ken had a distinguished 28-year career in the Westchester County District Attorney's Office, where he rose to Deputy Chief of the Investigations Division and was a pioneer in the area of computer crime prosecution. Next is Michael Delohery. Mike has spent the past 30 years of his career in public service. First, 5 years as Assistant District Attorney in the New York County District Attorney's Office. Then 25 years, and still counting, in the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. Mike has prosecuted many different cybercrime schemes, and he is currently Bureau Chief of the Cybercrimes Bureau of the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. Among his many professional activities, Mike is the chair of the New York State District Attorneys Association Legislative Subcommittee on Computer Crime Issues. And so, turning to our two experts, I asked this question. What are the most frequent cybercrime issues you are seeing today? And what can we do to protect ourselves? And Mike, can we start with you?
Sure, no problem. There's a few issues that are going on, and many of them are starting with what is being called phishing. And that is where you're getting those annoying emails telling you to click on something, and it looks like it's coming from somewhere that you might have been, and maybe you actually had. The issue is, what do you do when you get it? So that leads into another area, which is called spear phishing. And in spear phishing, it is a very directed approach. They have gained some information about you. They know a bit about your background, and they are now tailoring that phishing email so that you will really believe that it's meant for you. And then a couple of the other things that are happening, and we can get into more detail as we go along, but we have been experiencing where a lot of the businesses in the area have seemingly been hacked into, but when they've investigated it, they can't see how they were hacked into. Generally, what's happening is the business is conducting a transaction. The transaction involves some type of monetary transfer. When that transfer is supposed to be made, probably a day or so before, they get an email saying, please send it to such and such bank via wire transfer. And unfortunately, a lot of people have done that. We are continuing to have problems where minors are online and saying and doing inappropriate things. And we also continue to have many child sexual exploitation cases that are sent to us. So right now, those would be the main areas that I'm dealing with. And we can certainly get into more detail as we go along.
Yeah, I would say that surprisingly, after, or perhaps it shouldn't be surprising, but after really 40 years of responding to computer misuse of one form or another, the single most common element that has never been resolved is human error. So I'm seeing very much the same kind of cases in the private sector that Mike is seeing in the public sector. I mean, we see people who are falling victims to scams that come about because of a fraudulent phone call or because of an email scam. The problems that are coming to my attention are not ones that are based on superior computer technology and the prowess of a rogue nation state to break into a corporate network. They are simply people making mistakes in how they use their computer. And so one of the things everybody has to realize is that no matter how good your computer is in terms of its software protection, no matter how well your bank sets up to be sure that nobody can hack into your account, it is human error that creates most of the vulnerabilities. And so we can talk about ransomware attacks and what that means, such as we've recently heard about on the Colonial Pipeline. And we can talk about much more mundane matters, like somebody gets a phone call saying, you know, your social security number has been compromised, call this number immediately. All right. In either case, what happens is somebody does something foolish. It's human error that underlies a lot of what we call computer crime. And we need really more than anything else to increase the sense of security awareness of the computer owner or the employee who's using the corporate network, because that really is the most important part of any defense profile. To give you one simple example, I just completely finished working with a client who got contacted, and she couldn't even tell me whether it was on a phone call or an email or a text message, because the origin of it had just gotten lost in the emotional trauma. But she got one of those messages purportedly from Apple Computer saying that your computer has been compromised. Please call this number right away. Well, She was one of those people whose personal lifestyle had her living alone, and she didn't call anybody to double check whether or not this might be real. She simply got concerned and she responded, and ultimately it cost her hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not because she gave away her banking information, but because the person that she spoke to on the phone spun such a story that was so credible to her that she thought she was dealing with law enforcement, and law enforcement working with Apple security were trying to find some bad guys and said, would you please wire transfer some money to this bank over in Hong Kong, because then we'll trace your funds and you'll get it all back at the end. And well, you know, that first transfer wasn't quite enough. Could you send another one, etc. And it cost her hundreds of thousands because before she finally spoke to somebody who explained to her that she was a victim of a scam. So again, you know, no matter what the technological approach is, human error is at the core of so much of it.
One of the things that we consistently talk about is when you receive that email and you're looking at it and you're thinking to yourself, you know, something just doesn't seem to be right about it. So the approach is think before you click. Take that extra second, hang on to it. There's a reason why you're saying to yourself, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And one of the things is if you delete it, it's really no big deal. Because if it's somebody that knows you, they're definitely going to get back to you. Whether they'll give you a phone call or send you another email, they'll let you know somehow or another. And it's certainly better than taking that chance and clicking on the email and then a link that's inside of it. That's the most dangerous part.
Right. And I had a very interesting case a few years ago where the victim of the computer attack was not the same as the financial victim. So here's how it worked. There was a very small, well, technically a hedge fund, but really it was a very limited number of people. So it was more like a pooled investment club. And in the post-Madoff era, those organizations always have sort of a third party sitting between you and your bank, so that you issue an instruction to the third party administrator. The third party administrator is the one who speaks to the bank, and it's designed to try and prevent self-dealing, et cetera. Well, what happened is that one day the investment club decided to make an investment, and they issued an instruction to their third party administrator, and the third party administrator says, I'm sorry, you don't have enough funds left in your account. Well, what do you mean? We haven't invested anything in quite a while. And they said, yeah, you gave us all these instructions to make all these transfers. And we did. What instructions? What transfers? Well, you get the story. The third party administrator had been compromised. And by looking in the third party administrator's files, the intruder knew how to mimic an instruction from this investment club and mimicked the instruction, sent it to the third party administrator, who in a series of transfers stole millions of dollars. To make matters worse, at the very end of everything, the bad guy sent an email to both parties saying, this was easy, thanks. Yeah, that's just plain cruel. But the key to the whole thing was that the investment club had a domain name in which there were two L's. So I'll make up a name just for the illustration, but let's assume it was something like Hilltop, HILLTOP.com. And when the bad guy sent his email to the third party administrator, they spelt it HILLL top.com. Well, the human eye is not going to notice that third L, I guarantee you, it's just not. But as somebody has just suggested in the chat feature here, if you put your mouse on top of that, you'll see the real domain name. There are, there's that kind of trick. But the other idea is that this third party administrator, their job is to make sure that the investment is consistent with investment history. And this was completely not. So yes, you had to have not only a human error, in terms of responding to the unauthorized email, but then the additional simply professional error of not doing your job as a fiduciary. But again, is it clever technology or is it human error? And you see where the weight of the vulnerability is on the level of human error. And then my interesting challenge with my forensic team was to take a look at all of the computers used by this investment club to prove a negative, to prove that they had not been broken into and were not the source of the information which was used to mislead the third-party administrator. And then, of course, the lawyers get involved and they do what they're going to do. But again, it comes back to this question of it's clever technology in the terms of how I put the scam out there, but it's human weakness to fall victim to it.
Yeah, Ken, we know this is like a long time thing that's been happening in computer crime cases, and it's really the old school social networking with just a new twist on it. And instead of calling you up directly and being able to con you over the phone, like Kevin Mitnick did years ago, this is now changed to, all right, we have a list. People are able to go on the dark web, buy all these lists. They'll have your name, they'll have your email address. They may even have some information about you. And now they can just dump that list and start cranking it out and sending it out to as many people as possible. And this is really what is the troubling part, because you're going to be inclined to want to go along with it. And so you have to be able to take that step back and say, I need to be careful here, and I need to think about what I'm doing before I make that step forward. And somebody was just asking about somebody was asking about where you should go to report this. And it really depends on the level. If it is the phone scams that are continually going on that I'm getting almost every day about my car, or I'm going to go to get a week in a resort somewhere, that is usually controlled with the Federal Trade Commission. They know that these things are going on and they're trying to do stuff about it. There's been attempts to see how we could legislate against that, especially getting the phone companies involved in better monitoring. If it gets more serious and if there is some type of a crime that's involved, then certainly the two options would be to go to your local police department and to file a complaint with the district attorney's office. And we will definitely take a look at it. The reality could be that we would be lucky if we would get something. Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is coming from overseas. And it's not unusual. If you do put your mouse over the send and you start looking at it, you'll see .ru endings in a lot of these emails.
I have one question. What do we do to protect our children when they're on the internet? What advice do you have for that?
Well, I have a solution that always gets everybody's attention, but people get upset with the answer. And it's, don't go on the internet. Because in all seriousness, that's about the only way that you can truly protect your child. I mean, recently there was a crime where a 8-year-old child was on Instagram, and she met up with somebody on Instagram, and this other person started demanding that this child send naked pictures. The child did, and then this person said that if she didn't send more, he was going to go to her apartment and kill her. And finally, at that point, she notified her parents, and then her parents got a hold of the police. But unfortunately, this is going on consistently. I have an investigation right now involving a 12-year-old, where it's a sextortion case. We're trying to figure out who did this. We're working on a ping order to try to trace this person. And so these things are unfortunately continuing. I know when Ken and I started in the High Tech Bureau, we really thought that what we were going to be doing is all these wonderful hacking cases. And I mean, we do, but the cases that we really did a lot of work on involved child sexual exploitation. And it's sickening that it has continued for so many years.
Yeah, that is so true. And as you were mentioning or telling those stories, Mike, it just brought me back. That's not the sort of work that I do now, but I remember it very, very vividly. And I remember how heartbreaking so many of those stories were. And I'll briefly recount one of them now. But first, let me just back up. In terms of protecting your children, let me just say this, and this is the sort of thing that I would say to PTA groups, 30 years ago, but it's still true. When members of our generation grew up, our parents taught us how to cross the street safely, right? And when you were a certain age, your mom took you across the street, and then at some point she taught you how to cross the street and watched with her heart in her throat the first couple of times you did it. Okay, but parents can raise children to behave safely when parents are familiar with the dangers. Now, hopefully by this time, because we're now getting into what perhaps our third generation of Americans who are dealing in a digital world, and certainly children are dealing with digital reality at a younger and younger age. Hopefully parents now are doing something to educate their children as to how to grow up in a digital environment. But the only way you can properly do that is like crossing the street or using an oven. You appreciate what the dangers are so you can communicate them. And no parent is being a parent unless they understand those risks and can raise their child appropriately. So the story that sticks in my mind back from when Mike and I worked together, and Mike, I'm sure you'll remember this one. There was a 15-year-old boy who was online, and this was, I mean, a really good kid. I mean, he did all the right activities at high school, good grades, the whole ball of wax. And he's just online one night, and he meets what is purported to be a 17-year-old girl. If you're a 15-year-old boy, you're talking to a 17-year-old girl, and she starts talking about sex. You've died and gone to heaven. I'm sorry, that's just the reality of it, okay? And make a long story short, but she convinces him to make an explicit video of himself, promising one in return. He does. She then complains it's not good enough, and it becomes a sextortion case. And he has to begin to make a series of videos. At one point, it simply got to be too much. And as Mike described, this boy eventually went to his parents. And one thing that I would tell all parents to do when they find themselves in that kind of nightmare situation is understand that your child is a crime victim and has been manipulated. Never blame the child. That child is going to need you in ways that you never imagined for her or him to survive the ordeal they are about to go through. So parents, don't get angry. Put on your big boy pants and take care of your kid, okay? But
and to that end, that's one of the things, and you remember, we started going out to parents, to schools. For many years, we have been actively involved, especially with the Parent Teachers Association. We will go out at night. It's usually from 7 to 9 o'clock, and we'll talk to the parents. But we just don't stop there. We will go to the schools. Initially, we were just going to the high schools, mainly the juniors and seniors. We quickly realized that was just not sufficient. We would then start talking to the freshmen and sophomores. Now, we definitely go to the middle schools. We have at times gone to the grammar schools, because it's important that not only the teachers know, the parents need to know, and then hopefully that will go, and so that the students will also know that there's certain things that they need to be aware of. a lot of them, when we talk to them, do not realize the criminal implications of what they're doing. They just don't understand that they could potentially get arrested because they're sending nude pictures of themselves, or they're engaging in sexual acts that they've recorded and now they've distributed to somebody. And so, to me, the educational part of it makes a big, huge difference, and certainly is a help in getting the parents to the point where they can talk to their children and give them some really great guidance about what it is they should be and should really not be doing.
Right. One of the things that parents have to understand is that as you raise your child in a digital environment, the child, because they have only a child's reasoning, and this goes up at least through your middle teens, will confuse the knowledge about how to use the internet with the judgment about how it should be used. And they are not the same thing. Knowing how to drive a car is not the same thing as knowing how to operate a car safely. Using the internet is not the same thing as knowing how to use the internet safely. So in this case that I mentioned before, as the pressures built up on this boy, he did what we would want any child to do. Before he went to his parents, he went to his favorite teacher and complained to his teacher about what's happening to him. Well, make a long story short, it turned out that this 17-year-old girl that was sextorting him was the male teacher that he went to for guidance. Right? That male teacher was online in multiple identities, stalking students in his school. You see, children just don't know that the world can be that evil. And so it becomes very important to raise your child in an online environment to let them know how to be there safely. That's mission critical for parenting in the 21st century.
If you could if you were to devise a list of suggestions of the lessons a parent might give a child on how to safely manage your way through the internet, what would be the things that you would include on that list?
One of the most important things, and Ken and I have discussed this many times, is something that's in a way simple, but it's also difficult. When they're on social media, they have a friends list in whatever fashion, whichever way you want to call it. The question is, who are all those people that are listed as your friends? Now, there's an easy way to go and check. It's essentially go back in and go down through the list. Look at the name. Is there somebody there that you're saying, wow, I have no idea who that person is? Because if you do, you better get rid of it. And on the other side of it, as a parent, this is just showing to the child that you as a parent are interested, that you're concerned, that you love them, and you love them so much, you're going to somewhat intrude into their privacy. And you're going to have to do that at certain times, and other times you're going to have to step back. So how you do that is really going to depend on the dynamic within your family. But a discussion has to be there about what you are doing and what things you are doing online in particular. So if you have a lot of friends, and sometimes there's competitions to say, I've got 10,000 friends, how many friends do you have? And I know that sounds crazy, but that's what happens. And we also know from past experience that all too frequently, young ladies will dress inappropriately so that they can get more friends. And so that leads to other issues. And part of it is if the parent is saying, look, let me see what you're doing, or at least talking to them about it. Because we also know that most of the students have at least 3 different identities. One that they want the school to know about, one that they want their parents to know about, and then one they want everybody else to know about so they get lots of friends. And trying to monitor all of that is probably impossible. But the thing to do is at least try to engage and get them to realize that, hey, there may be some danger here. If you are doing these things, think twice about it.
On a more mundane level, which is something that has become so relevant during the pandemic, is I particularly have purchased so many things online from so many different places. What should we look out for when purchasing online, as everyone now is doing it to such an extent?
Well, you know, it's that old, you know, common sense idea is how much do you know about who you're dealing with? Okay, so is the retailer that you're dealing with someone you've heard of, someone you've dealt with before? If it's a first-time exposure to an online merchant that you're not familiar with, you know, do a Google search first. You know, just try to do some background checks. See if you can get some sense about that. If there's something trustworthy about them. And it also depends. Are you buying, you know, a $30 bottle of vitamins or a $500, you know, purchase of something else? That certainly plays into it also. I would certainly never recommend storing a credit card with a merchant. I don't think that's a good idea. One of the things a lot of people do is that they will use one email address for doing all of your commercial activities online and another one for doing any of your personal activities. Certainly, if you do set up an account with a merchant, never use the same user ID and password for more than one account. You need a separate one for every account. It can be something simple that, you know, you sort of have a model like your two initials, lowercase, part of the merchant's name in uppercase, and then, you know, some other number. You know, you can use a formula that's going to be familiar to you so you can remember it, but you never want to use the same user ID and password, because then if you're compromised once, you're compromised everywhere. You know, so a lot of it is just, you know, being aware of what are the risks that you're taking. And as Mike pointed out so well, you know, we do have these little voices in the back of our brain for a reason. And if something says, I shouldn't click that, or I shouldn't make this purchase, it just looks a little squirrely, then don't. There's always another merchant out there. You know, you're not going to run out of people to buy widgets from on the internet. So just use a little common sense.
If I may ask you to explain, if in the event you are hacked or you think you've become a victim of a cybercrime, who would you contact? We know the police, but contact them. But where do you go to get your computer health restored and to get your remedies for what's happened?
Well, I'm going to go down the hall and talk to my IT guys, or I'll talk to my forensic experts that, you know, to see what's going on. Other people, it's going to be a different thing. It really depends on what's happened. If there is a serious crime that has been committed while online, then you definitely want to come and contact the local police department, contact our office. We have trained investigators that are, I know I'm going to be bragging, but these guys are really good. They, you know, Ken knows who they are. They're amazing. We have investigators that can get into phones that other people are not getting into. And so we're able to put together cases that not a lot of other places are able to, because of the training and experience that we have. And so my recommendation is, if you are hacked, you have to try to deal with it as soon as you can. And by that, I mean, shut down all of your computers at home. Just stop so that nothing further can happen. Because one of the things is, if they don't have a connection to the internet, they're not going to be able to have any influence on your computers. So if you think something funny is happening, disconnect from the internet. Then there's various types of malware programs, antivirus programs, and then registry editor programs to see what is taking place. And if you run those different programs, you're going to have a better idea of what's going on. But run them not connected, because let's face it, that's how everybody's getting hacked. You're not getting hacked because somebody came into your house directly and did something to your computer. It's because you were online and somebody was able to compromise it because of whatever happened when you were online.
Yeah, there's a suggestion that I have made to clients from time to time that I'd be interested in hearing Mike's response to this. But and it certainly has happened that because some member of a family has done something foolish, that the family's home network got compromised and some malware may have moved from one device to another based upon how the family uses it. And when people have asked me, okay, I'm going to go to whatever computer shop or antivirus company and try and get everything fixed, but how do I communicate safely in the interim? And my sort of stock answer has been, go to your best friend, have your best friend buy a phone and add that phone to his or her carrier's account so that it is in the friend's name, not yours. And then you use it, pay them the $50 a month, I mean, you don't have to like make them pay for your phone bill, but don't operate under your own name. And so you could use that one to communicate with law enforcement, your attorney or your whatever. And I, generally speaking, I think that would be a safe way of at least setting up a short-term communication ability if you really think that somebody is stalking you electronically. Mike, I mean, what do you think? I mean, is that?
No, Ken, that's exactly what we recommend, especially when we're dealing. I know it's great. How's that for gratification? It is true though. We do recommend, especially if we are dealing with any type of domestic violence incidents or a divorce case, husband, wife, that you need to be able to protect your conversation. Well, we don't say go get your neighbor's phone. What we do recommend is you get a burner phone. They're cheap. Go get one. Try to go off the grid, as they say, as much as you possibly can. So that would be like with what Kenneth said earlier. Yeah, get a different email. Get a few different emails. They're free. You can have as many as you want. And that way, if you need to contact somebody, you can hopefully do it as safely as possible. And also, it would mean it's really much more difficult for anybody to find out who you are. A lot of what's happening is happening because not your account in particular has been compromised, but the store, the agency, whatever it was that got hacked into, and however they got hacked into, they gave out your information, not intentionally, but they kept it. And so the less information that you can have stored somewhere, the better off you're going to be. With the realization that the government is storing a whole ton of information about us. And you just have to hope that it doesn't get hacked into.
So speaking about hacking the government, there's a question pending here about.
Yeah, I'm going to address that right now.
Good,
So,
Mike.
This is something that actually has happened. I'm not going to say where because it would be embarrassing. People come into work and they're sitting down at their computer. It's early in the morning and they start looking through their email. Their email is one of the first things they do. All right, what do I need to get taken care of for today? As they're doing that, they come across an email that they're looking at it and they're going, wow, this looks like really familiar, but maybe, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right. So one person, at least, and we think many more, opened the email and then clicked on the PDF. Now, at the time, nothing happened. So the person who clicked on it didn't see anything, didn't think there was any big deal. Forward to the next morning. The IT people come in and they're looking at their screens and they're going, something is wrong. There's too much activity. And they start to see that progressively all the files on their server are getting encrypted. And they had a big decision to make. And the decision they made was to pull the plug. Somewhat like I said before, if you're not connected to the internet, they're not going to be controlling it. If the machine is not running, it's hard to do something to it. So they pulled the plug. And what they found out was that the PDF was actually a virus and it was a ransomware virus. So what it did was it went from file to file, encrypting the files, And later that day, there was an email sent out essentially saying, if you want to unencrypt all of your data, pay us money. All right, so this entity had a choice. They could pay and get it decrypted, or they could say, don't worry, we've got backup. We're not going to worry about it. So fortunately, everything had been backed up the night before. So whatever data was lost would have been minimal from, say midnight to the attack actually took place between 3 and 4 in the morning. I mean, it's really devious because they knew full well that if somebody hit on it immediately, hit the PDF and saw something happen, they would report it. So nothing happened. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the morning, the attack starts. So this entity was really lucky. They were able to back it up. And that is really the big choice in any type of ransomware case. And we have had them in the county. We've had the libraries, and we've had schools. And the choice is, do you pay? And some companies have, and up in Albany, the police department actually did pay $300,000. So it's a, and it is an option across the country. It has happened where, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars have been paid out. The question is, and this becomes somewhat of an IT question and also a financial question, because the IT can back up everything. But if you back up everything, how much will that cost? Can you afford to have all that backed up? And then that also begs the question, can you afford not to have it that way? So you have to be careful, and there's going to be a balancing act. How did all of this start, though? It gets back to what Ken and myself have been talking about, is the human error element. It always seems to be somebody makes a mistake, not intentionally, and it's totally a mistake, accidental, but it leads to all these other things. The IT had everything locked down. As Ken said, it's hard to hack into a place now. And the hack's normally not coming because of some code compromise. It's coming because a third party, a fourth party, some other vendor that helps out, they get compromised because they don't have very good security. And then the attack comes from that point. It's the old theory of when somebody's in jail, the guards have to watch them all the time. They only need 1 second to be able to get out. And that's what all of these people are trying to do. Just find that one little hole that they can use.
I see that we have some questions mounting up in the chat, and I think other people want to raise their hands. So Nina, do you want to?
Shall we start with the some of the chat questions? I think that you all have them in front of you. I think some of them have been answered already, but if we start at the top from Fran Snedeker, and it's what we were talking about before this program started. When you get these phone calls, I certainly, as I mentioned, I get them. And if it isn't about my warranty expiring, it's, someone has my social security card, or my bank says, oh, there was a recent one with my bank that I'm being denied access to an account that I never actually had. But can you touch on how to protect against that?
So I'll give you an example of something that actually happened, not to me, but to my mom. She got a call and it said that me, her son, now they didn't say the name, which was interesting. That was her fault for not, cluing in on that. But they said that your son is in jail, which given my job is pretty amusing, but really not that funny. And so my mom, okay, also my mom's from Ireland, and she came to the United States in the late 50s. So while she knows how to use a computer, she doesn't have internet or anything like that. And so this was something that she thought was real. She called me up in a panic. Actually, she didn't call me, she called my wife because she thought I was in jail. And so fortunately, she did not pay my bail. But, this is what's going on. And the thing is, I don't know how you could stop this. it is really somewhere along the line, public service announcements, education in the community to be aware of it. And I know on a consistent basis, we're putting information out that we get, the county puts information out that they get, the police departments put in information out about all of these different types of things that are taking place. And so if something new comes along, we do try to let people know, and especially during certain seasons, definitely around Christmas time, that these things will happen because they know people are in a good mood and they're out there trying to do different, make different purchases. So again, it's like you got to be able to say to yourself, is this too good to be true? If it is, there's a reason for that.
The county executive, George Latimer, I think you basically answered this question, but he did.
Yeah, that was the one I was talking about with the ransomware. I'd seen that. Thanks, Ian.
Okay. There was another comment, less of a question, about the number of records compromised at 37 billion in the year 2020 compared to the Equifax breach at 147 million. And what I would add to that is anybody who, and I have worked for the federal government, I've gotten my letter and, health, I think it was Office of Personnel Management was hacked. And that's a lot of people, whose information was taken. That was, I don't know how many years ago, but nonetheless, that was the first time I found out that my information has been hacked. And, so you go to Equifax or Experian or whatever. Somehow that didn't really comfort me.
It shouldn't, but you have to realize there is nothing you can do to prevent the people with whom I'm not quite sure how to get this sentence out. I apologize, but what in the modern environment, you trust your information with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of merchants.
Yeah.
Okay. And with credit card companies and with financial institutions and with healthcare providers, et cetera. There's very little you can do to make them keep your data safe. So my suggestion is always assume that your data is at risk, if not already compromised. But then the question becomes, how do you behave in an environment in which your information is not safe? And this gets back to some of the things we've already talked about. You have your human radar turned on so that you don't fall victim to the various scams that assault you. You don't repeat user IDs. You don't repeat passwords. You don't store credit cards. Okay, you do those sorts of things which create the environment in which if your data is compromised because of somebody else's error, it's not enough data for it to be misused. And as an ultimate fallback, freeze your credit. I mean, that's really easy. Just go online and freeze your credit. And when you want to take out a new credit card or you want to buy a car and you're going to need a loan, you just unfreeze it for 24 hours. But by and large, keep your credit frozen. Mm-hmm. That is so key. And the credit card companies get it. And so it's not hard to go online and freeze your account and then unfreeze it. And sometimes, depending upon the particular merchant, you don't even have to unfreeze your account. You simply have to get Experian or whoever else to issue you a one-time use PIN that you can provide to the merchant, which allows the merchant to make an inquiry into your credit history to decide to continue with a transaction. I mean, that's just mission critical.
Ken stated upon a really interesting aspect of going forward with how to do transactions. And it's about essentially what type of authentication are you going to go through? Initially, it's just a password. But now a lot of places are forcing that you have 2 levels of authentication. So not only do you have to get your password, but then once you've got the password activated and clicked on, now you have another screen that comes up and it says, all right, you're going to get sent a verification code. Now that verification code has to be placed in there so that you can have a second level of authentication to make sure that you are who you claim to be. I'm not saying it's perfect, because obviously if you have a computer, everything can get hacked into at one point in time. But this is definitely an approach that's helping and making it more difficult for people to be compromised.
There are some questions for you in the chat. We have a question from Marlene Colbert and also from Steve Otis, who is our assemblyman. Let's start with Steve. Sorry, Marlene, but what changes in state law would assist in the prosecution of those conducting these economic crimes? If you can answer that question, please.
Well, it's been years since I worked frauds. I mean, most of the laws that are there, especially for economic crime, they're viable already. They really are practical. It's always based upon, well, what was stolen and what was the amount, and that will give you the different level of the crime. I mean, there can be issues about aggregating, if there's 10 different people and there's only the one criminal, can all of them be put together? That becomes an issue. But most of this is really the ability of law enforcement to find who was the criminal and then be able to get that person. And the laws that are in place now are sufficient that we can do that. It's not easy because it requires various levels, starting with grand jury subpoenas, then search warrants, and then the most difficult, that would be some type of a wiretap. But offhand, I can't say there's exactly something that is so glaringly in need.
There are some questions coming in. Well, we have another question on the in the chat from Marlene, who asks if you make a recommendation that people do not do online banking, and you can answer that. But there are also some questions in that have come in. So one question from Michael Plansky is, ransomware seems to be principally directed towards corporate, governmental, and nonprofit entities. As an individual, do I have any significant risk from this cyber threat?
Personal risk with ransomware, yes, entirely possible. And I mean, here's the thing. It's like, why do people rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. And so that's not going to be so different of a theory here. They're going to go after the bigger entities because they know they have the money, and they know that being shut down is going to make the life very difficult. Some of the government agencies in Florida went through this. They, even after paying the ransomware, it still took them months to get all of their data back and back online in such a way that they knew it wasn't compromised. Because that's the other thing. It's fine to say you've gotten it decrypted. Now the question is there some back door that's been put in there? Is that data safe is really what it gets down to. And that takes a lot of time to go back and check through that. Would some individual be attacked? I would not be surprised.
I'd like to offer a comment that I think goes to several of the questions that are pending in the chat function, and also addressing the issue of legislation. America is sadly behind the times in terms of how it views the privacy of its citizens. In the European Union, and increasingly around the entire world, personal privacy is viewed as a right of citizenship or residency within a given country. That is not true in the United States. In the United States, privacy is dealt with on siloed industry by industry bases. So the fact that you have a commercial relationship with a bank or a credit card company or your local heating supply company gives them the obligation to keep your data safe. But it's one person, one merchant at a time. It's obsolete, quite frankly. That what New York State needs, it should follow the example of California and Virginia and enact comprehensive personal privacy legislation. personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I think the only way Congress is going to enact a national privacy policy is if enough states do it so that we get conflicting regimes and Congress has to straighten it out. I won't say anything more about Congress, but I will quote Mark Twain, who described Congress once as America's only indigenous criminal class. But that's just a quote. But Assemblyman Otis, a comprehensive privacy statute for New York State is essential so that we don't treat our personal information in separated, siloed, inconsistent patterns. My data is my data and I own it. And any merchant I trust it to, any government agency I trust it to, must treat it in a uniform fashion according to the rights that I granted for my data.
There are a couple of more questions. One is a request from one of our board members to provide a list of the major points of self-protection to the summit, which we would then send out to our mailing list, which we would find to be very helpful if that's possible for you to do. And there's also a comment I see here from our assemblyman that he is having an assembly roundtable on the privacy issue next week, and he agrees with what you've just said. So I think that's an important thing for us to know. And there are finally two other questions, and they have to do with the responsibility of social media for the prevalence of cybercrime, and how does one on an individual basis deal with ransomware? So there are your topics if you care to proceed any further. You can see them in the question and answer area.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for that, Nina. What time does it say on it?
Well, they're starting at 8:21, 8:31, 8:35, and 8:40.
Okay.
They're in the, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. Can you see the Q&A?
No, I'm just gonna see the chat, sorry.
Okay. So one is how if an individual has a significant risk for ransomware, and another is if social media, the responsibility of social media for the prevalence of cybercrime. And in connection with the first one, how does one deal with ransomware? So I think that people on an individual basis are concerned about ransomware and also social media, which I think you've touched on both of these, but if there's more.
As far as ransomware goes, from everything that we have experienced, it is really down to two things. You're either going to pay or you're not going to pay. Entirely your choice. Whatever is to your benefit, you do it. Realizing that if you pay, then you're putting out an expense, and you can't guarantee that whatever you have is totally safe once it's been decrypted. On the other side is you may have, and hopefully you do, back up regularly. And if you do that, then whatever files you have there should be able to come back. And I mean, for me personally, what I do is I have several different thumb drives that I keep. So anything that I need, I put on thumb drives. I keep them separate so they're not in my computer so they can't get hacked into. Mm-hmm. Now, if something was to happen to my computer, what I would do is first, obviously, disconnect from the internet, and I would then reset Windows. I use Windows, I'm sorry, I'm not an Apple person, and I just like the control that I have. So I can reset and start all over again. And because I've backed up my files, all that data that I would need, I can now just move over and put it back in.
Yeah, that really is the best answer. And one thing you have to recognize, suppose you have a ransom demand for $500 in Bitcoins or something. So then you've got to open up a Bitcoin account. You've got to make the transfer, and then you're going to get a code back. Maybe you won't, but if you do, the code should work. Maybe it won't. Right? So, I mean, there are no guarantees here. And for all of the representatives of larger organizations that are attending this webinar, It is the official opinion of the FBI that you should not pay a ransom because you are then, frankly, just encouraging organized crime. And just to make matters a little worse, in the federal government, there's an organization called the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which contains a list of entities, whether it's governments or other organizations like terrorist organizations, with which Americans cannot engage in transactions. And they are actually enforcing against larger entities who pay ransomware ransoms, whether or not they have done anything to ensure they are not giving that money to an organization that's on the OFAC prohibited transactions list. And it's like, well, how am I supposed to know, right? But they're enforcing that obligation. So in fact, if you're a big enough entity, you may come under pressure from the federal government for trying to pay a ransom to recover your data. So it is a very nuanced question about whether or not to pay.
There is I'm sorry, Doris, go ahead.
I was wondering if there's any specific malware or virus protection software you recommend to put on individual computers?
I cannot do that.
No, I couldn't either. I mean, there are, first of all, there are many good ones. And all I can say is you've got to do your research. There are websites which offer comparisons for different types of anti-malware. I would certainly recommend that you do a little research before you buy one. For example, if you know somebody who is really good at computer security, ask him or her, what do you use? I mean, that's frankly is my best form of research is to talk.
Well, Ken, what do you use?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Ken, what do you use?
Well, then I probably
You're my expert.
you know more than me use. Yeah, right. But you know, you know, in a public forum, no, I'm never going to endorse a particular product. And it also depends on what it is that you're protecting. There are some products that will protect a number of devices under one contract. Some of them will protect your laptop plus your phone. Some are just going to work on your computer. So you have to take a look at what your needs are and do a little research. But no anti-malware can be 100% effective. You are your ultimate defense perimeter.
There is another question that has shown up, and it is, how safe are password savings apps like LastPass? And you don't have to endorse LastPass. I heard what you said.
Without endorsing any particular product, because I'm not allowed to do that. In theory, it is a very good idea to have a password manager, because as Ken was explaining earlier, there is a really good benefit to having multiple identities and multiple passwords. Unfortunately, when you have so many, it's hard to remember them. And the password manager can do a very fine job of controlling that. And a lot of the security magazines will tell you that this is a great idea as far as keeping your passwords safe, because you're not going to be storing them on your computer, and therefore it won't be compromised on your end.
There is a question pending about social media culpability. Mm-hmm. I can only, look, so I'm an attorney, but I don't practice law. Guidepost is an investigations and compliance firm. So I'm certainly not offering any kind of legal opinion here. But the idea that you might try to hold a social media platform responsible for what you do on it is not going to be a really strong argument, I don't think. So rather than wondering about whether or not some social media platform is going to be responsible, I think we should all practice about being responsible for what we do on social media. I think that's a better way to look at it.
Ken, this is also an issue that's being litigated to a certain extent, especially in California, and that's mainly because of where the companies are located. And this is coming under 230. So there is right now essentially a safe harbor for all the social media companies, because they're just, what they're really saying is, look, we're just making the forum available. We didn't say anything. And so far, that's the 230 provision is being upheld, but there's definitely some legislation that's been proposed in Congress to change that. What will happen, I'm not sure.
Right. And Mike, if my recollection is correct, you're referring to the Communications Decency Act?
No, it is part of it, but there's like a subsection 230 that gives them these, it's a provision so that it essentially allows them to communicate and be in the communication business without taking full responsibility for what is posted on their site.
Right. Yeah. So there's some legislative immunity given to social media platforms, and so as Mike just pointed out, that is essentially a legislative decision, that Congress would have to make. But again, why am I going to be dependent upon Instagram for what I do on Instagram? I should depend on me to use Instagram intelligently.
I think, Doris, I'm going to turn this to you. I think we're probably going to wrap up, but I do want to say that after Doris speaks, and we thank our guests who were really wonderful, if there are any community announcements, that please place them in the chat for everyone to see, so that we are aware of what's happening in the community.
I just wanted to thank Ken and Mike again for spending this morning with us, and it's been really informative, I think, to all of us. A little scary too.
Yeah. A lot scary.
We've done our job then.
Yeah.
I want to keep Mike busy.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you so very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And anyone who has an announcement, a public announcement for the community, please let us know, and okay, and we do have them. I'll repeat them, but they're here in the chat. There's an LMC, March LMC for the League of Women Voters Candidates Forum, which I'm assuming you're referring to for the school board. I think that is tonight. And I think that's the only announcement that we have. So please remember to vote and listen to the debates, because we do have an awful lot of candidates who are running for school board, and that's something that this community historically has not really had. So I think we have a responsibility to support those people who have gone out and decided to run for this office, and it's important. And that's my 2 bits on this. And they also will be, I guess Marlene is telling us that there are 2 forums, and they are online, and they're for the school board. So thank you, Marlene. If you happen to know the dates and the times, you could post that in our chat. And we look forward to seeing everyone next year. We don't know as I said, we don't know what kind of format, whether it will be Zoom or if it will be in person. That will, I guess, depend on what happens on the ground, what we see, how the things go with the pandemic, and what kind of social distancing, and what's the availability of the Nautilus, and time will tell. But thank you to everyone. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to all the people who've supported our programs and supported us, and to LMC Media during a year that could be described as a little stressful. So anyway, and thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Sean. Sean is here, and he's the one who's handling all the technical stuff, because God knows you don't want me to do that. So
Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I guess this concludes the meeting.
Bye. Thank you.
thanks.